You are basically a dinosaur with a clipboard. That is what Derek Albright said to me on a humid Tuesday morning in my own office. Well, it had been my office for 22 years. It was his office for about 8 weeks. But he was the one standing, and I was the one being told to pack up. So, I guess the office belonged to Derek now. My name is Jim Vance. I am 55 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I had spent the last 22 years making sure $19 billion in cargo moved through Gulf Coast Port Authority without the board ever understanding how. The humidity was thick that morning, a typical Houston summer. You could see the heat waves rising off the concrete dock through my office window. Container cranes stretched into the haze like steel giants. The sound of the port was my soundtrack. Crane alarms, diesel engines, the deep horn blasts echoing across the ship channel. That was my world, my life, and my home. I stood by the window, holding a lukewarm cup of black coffee, watching the tugboats push a massive vessel into place. The rhythm of the port was a complex dance, and I was the choreographer. Derek walked in at 8:15 in the morning. He did not knock. He had an HR woman named Karen behind him holding a tablet, looking like she would rather be anywhere else. Derek did not sit down. He just stood there in his slim fit suit and designer sneakers that had never touched dock pavement. "Jim," he said, checking his Apple Watch 2 times before he even started talking, "we are implementing a digital transformation initiative. Your position has been optimized out." He said it like he was reading a PowerPoint slide. Then came the line I will never forget. "We are paying a director's salary for a man who essentially plays Tetris with boats. 22 years of manual processes pretending to be management." That is how he put it. The HR woman's eyes stayed glued to her tablet. I looked at Derek for about 3 seconds. I did not argue. I picked up my logbook from the desk, a small black notebook with worn edges and 22 years of shorthand, vessel names, tide windows, and crane rotations. My life work and chicken scratch that nobody else could read. I slid it into my back pocket, left my badge on the desk, and walked out without saying a word. Before Gulf Coast Port Authority, I was in the United States Marine Corps for 15 years. I was a logistics coordination specialist, making sure supplies moved through some of the nastiest places on Earth. Iraq, Afghanistan, keeping convoys moving when a miscalculation did not mean a late delivery. It meant body bags. I made Gunnery Sergeant E7. I was good at holding multiple moving pieces in my head and knowing where each one would be 96 hours out. When I got out at 33, Gulf Coast hired me because I could look at a harbor full of container ships and see the chess game 3 moves ahead. Which vessel needs which berth at which tide, which crane is available, which customs team clears faster on Thursday mornings, which longshoreman crew runs 25% faster when the local baseball team won the night before. I could sequence 70 container ships simultaneously from memory. Not from software, but from 22 years of watching, listening, and remembering. I knew every crane operator, every harbor pilot, and every customs official by name. 310 shipping dispatchers across 16 countries knew my voice. I knew that Lin in Shanghai always adds 6 hours to his transit estimates because he is paranoid about delays. I knew that Gomez in Veracruz will not book Friday departures because his brother died on a Friday 14 years ago. I knew that if you call the harbor pilots by their first names and ask about their kids, they respond 30% faster. None of this was documented. It did not need to be. I was always there. The sound of that port was in my blood. Crane hydraulics cycling through their sequences, container locks slamming into place with that metallic clang, the deep rumble of a Panamax engine vibrating up through the dock into your chest, marine radio chatter crackling from the speaker mounted behind my desk. That was my world. Every day for 22 years I kept it moving. I put in the hours, missed family dinners, and lived by the tides. The board never asked how it worked. They just saw the numbers and assumed the port ran itself. They did not know that a port is not just concrete and cranes. It is a living, breathing ecosystem built on trust, handshakes, and decades of mutual respect. Derek Albright thought he could replace all of that with a line of code and a shiny dashboard. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson in maritime reality. He was a young man with big degrees and zero dirt under his fingernails. He believed that everything in the world could be reduced to a mathematical formula and optimized by an algorithm. He did not understand that ships are guided by people, not numbers, and that those people have fears, habits, and loyalties. He did not understand that when the wind kicks up in the channel, you cannot consult a spreadsheet to keep two giant steel vessels from colliding. You need to know the pilot on the bridge, you need to know what he is capable of, and you need to trust his judgment. I had spent 2 decades building that trust. I had earned the respect of the men who worked the docks in the blistering heat and the freezing rain. Derek saw none of that. He only saw an old Marine with a notebook, standing in the way of his digital revolution. So he wrote his email to the board, convinced he was saving the company money, and showed me the door. I walked out of the building, feeling the heavy Texas heat settle over my shoulders, and headed toward my truck. The game was far from over, but for the first time in 22 years, I was just a spectator. I walked out to the parking lot, the asphalt radiating heat that softened the soles of my boots. I sat in the cab of my heavy-duty pickup truck, engine off, windows rolled down, listening to the familiar cacophony of the docks one last time, the rhythmic hum of the container ship engines, the distant shouts of the deckhands, the screech of steel on steel. I threw my worn leather work gloves on the passenger seat next to my safety vest. For the last 22 years, this truck had been my mobile command center, parked in the same spot by the main terminal gate. Now, I was just a visitor who had overstayed his welcome. I started the engine and drove home, the highway shimmering in the midday sun. The ride was quiet, save for the hum of the tires on the hot pavement. I found myself checking my watch every few minutes, a habit of a man whose life was dictated by shipping schedules and tied windows. My wife, Sarah, was waiting for me. She always knows when something is off. She did not say a word, just set a plate of grilled chicken, rice, and green beans in front of me. We had been married for 25 years, and this Tuesday rotation was a quiet comfort we had shared through the best and worst times. Sarah had been fighting breast cancer for 4 years now. She works in hospital administration at Memorial Hospital, managing chaotic schedules and fighting insurance companies while undergoing her own treatments. She had survived the surgeries, the chemotherapy, and the endless scans. Her strength made my bad day look like a minor inconvenience. She sat across from me, waiting patiently while I ate. She did not pry or ask immediate questions. She knew that I needed time to process what had happened. We sat in the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the window over the sink, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Our son, Toby, came through the kitchen around 9 o'clock. In the evening, his heavy gym bag slung over his shoulder. He was 18, a starting linebacker for Pearland High, and wore number 46. He had his mother eyes and my stubborn determination. He looked at my face, paused, and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine and to go get some rest. He nodded, knowing when to give me space, and headed upstairs. I looked at the photo of Toby on my phone, taken during last season. He had recorded 3 tackles and an interception in his biggest game, a game I had missed because a chemical tanker emergency had pinned me to the operations center for 24 hours straight. I still felt the sting of that absence, but Sarah had kept the family together, never complaining about the demands of my job. She understood that the port did not sleep, and therefore neither did I. Once Toby's bedroom door closed, Sarah looked at me. "They fired you," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I replied. "Derek." She set her coffee mug down and did not touch it again. "What are you going to do?" I told her I did not know yet. I spent the next day sitting at the kitchen table with my logbook open. I did not read the pages, I just held the worn leather cover. 22 years of shorthand, birth assignments, and tide tables. To anyone else, it was a dead language. To me, it was the DNA of the Gulf Coast shipping industry. I thought about the days spent in the freezing rain, the midnight phone calls, the emergency board meetings, and the endless cups of terrible coffee. I had given that place my youth, my energy, and my time, and it had all been wiped away by a young man who thought my career was a game of Tetris. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Donnie Briggs, my senior operations supervisor, and a close friend who had worked 24 years alongside me. Donnie was a Navy veteran, a man who did not scare easily and valued loyalty above all else. He had forwarded an email that Derek had sent to the board of directors 4 days before firing me. The subject line read Operational Restructuring Phase 1. The email was filled with corporate buzzwords, but one paragraph made my chest tighten. We are paying a six-figure salary for a man who essentially plays Tetris with boats, Derek had written. I have seen mobile phone games more sophisticated than the manual processes Jim Vance uses. Donnie added a short message at the bottom. He has no idea what he is doing, Jim. We are already seeing the cracks. I read the text twice, my thumbs tracing the worn edges of my logbook. A quiet clarity washed over me. The anger I expected to feel did not come. Instead, I felt a calm resolution. They wanted a digital transformation, and they were going to experience the full consequences of their actions. I closed the logbook, put it in my drawer, and walked out to the back porch. The cranes of the port were visible in the distance, their red warning lights blinking against the dark Texas sky. I stood there for a long time, listening to the distant rumble of the ships. For the first time in 22 years, I did not have to worry about the morning tide. I did not have to check the weather reports or call the harbor pilots. I went inside, sat next to Sarah, and slept better than I had in a decade. I knew that the storm was coming for Gulf Coast Port Authority, and I was finally safe on the shore. On Friday morning, my phone rang. The screen displayed the name Walt Harris. Walt was the chief executive officer of Harbor Point Maritime, the rival terminal located just 40 miles down the coast. He was 62 years old, a retired Navy captain, and a veteran of 32 years in the shipping industry. We had crossed paths during our military days and later at industry conferences. For 6 consecutive years, Walt had tried to recruit me to run operations at Harbor Point. Every year, I had politely declined out of loyalty to Gulf Coast Port Authority. I believed in finishing what I started, and I thought my loyalty would be returned. I was wrong, but Walt was patient. He knew that eventually, the corporate suits would make a mistake. Jim, Walt's voice boomed through the speaker. I heard what happened. I am not going to waste your time. I am offering you the position of Chief Operating Officer at Harbor Point. You will have full operational authority over the entire complex. We are talking a compensation package of $4,200,000 over 5 years, with performance bonuses tied directly to cargo throughput growth. You run the docks, I handle the board. What do you say? He did not ask me to explain why I was let go. He did not care about Derek opinions. He knew my work, he knew my reputation, and he knew that the shipping industry was built on results, not presentations. He remembered how we had managed the supply chain bottlenecks in Kuwait during the conflict, keeping the logistics flowing when everything else was failing. I told him I needed 24 hours to discuss it with Sarah. That evening, we sat at the kitchen table looking out at the ship channel. I laid out the details of Walt's offer. Sarah looked at me with a knowing smile. She did not ask about the money or the commute. She asked if I was ready to show them what 22 years of experience is actually worth. She told me that I had spent too long protecting a port that did not appreciate me. It was time to build something new, to show the industry that expertise cannot be replaced by corporate hubris. I called Walt the next morning and accepted the offer. 3 weeks later, I walked into my new office at Harbor Point Maritime. It was a corner office on the 8th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire terminal. From here, I could see the cranes moving, the tugboats guiding ships, and the trucks lining up at the gates. It was a blank canvas, and I had the brushes. My first week on the job, I did not look at spreadsheets or software manuals. I opened my black logbook and started making phone calls. I did not call executive suites or corporate logistics directors. I called the dispatchers. I called the people who actually control where the ships go when schedules fall apart. I called Lin in Shanghai. I called Gomez in Veracruz. I called Hansen in Rotterdam, Sean in Liverpool, and De Jong in Amsterdam. These were men and women I had spoken to weekly for over 2 decades. We had helped each other through hurricanes, labor strikes, and shipping crises. We shared a common language, a mutual understanding of the sea and the docks. We had a bond that had been forged in the crucible of real-world emergencies, and no digital interface could replace that history. Lynn, I said when he answered. It is Jim Vance. I am at Harbor Point now. Same cell number, different port. If you need berths, I have got them. Lynn did not hesitate. He told me he had been worried when he heard I was gone from Gulf Coast. He said he had already experienced delays with the new automated system they were trying to run. He said the system had rejected his vessel registrations twice because of formatting errors, and nobody in the office knew how to bypass the software. He told me he would redirect his next 3 vessels to Harbor Point immediately. Gomez called me back within an hour, asking if we could accommodate his deeper draft ships. I told him we had 58 feet of depth at our new berths, and we could stretch them to 64 feet if needed. He was relieved, explaining that Gulf Coast had messed up his last arrival schedule, costing his company thousands in wait times. One by one, the dispatchers responded to my calls. They did not care about the name on the terminal gate. They cared about the man on the other end of the line, the one who always answered the phone at 2 in the morning. Within 60 days, Harbor Point Maritime had secured $12 billion in annual cargo commitments that had previously gone to Gulf Coast. Our throughput surged and the terminal was humming with activity. I spent my days walking the docks, talking to the crane operators, and coordinating with the pilots. We were moving cargo faster and more efficiently than ever. I was back in my element, running the chess game I knew by heart. The workers at Harbor Point respected my experience. They knew I was a Marine, that I had worked the docks myself, and that I did not make promises I could not keep. We were building a powerhouse, and the industry was taking notice. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, the storm was just beginning to gather at my old port, and Derek Albright was about to discover that you cannot run a harbor with a glorified pizza delivery application. While Harbor Point was thriving, Gulf Coast Port Authority was falling apart. Donnie Briggs kept me updated through short daily text messages. He did not need to add commentary. The facts spoke for themselves. On day 1 of the new software implementation, Derek Albright Automated Scheduling Platform assigned 3 ultra-large container vessels to the same berth at the same tide window. Donnie caught the error manually before the harbor pilots launched the ships, preventing a major collision, but the resulting confusion delayed operations for hours. The software simply could not process the physical limitations of the berth or the wind conditions in the channel. It assumed that if a ship could fit on a map, it could fit in the water. On day 2, the platform assigned Crane 9 to unload 3 different vessels simultaneously. The software did not know that Crane 9 was shut down for hydraulic repairs, and nobody had input the maintenance schedule into the system. A 5-hour delay cascaded into a 9-hour bottleneck, causing 4 vessels to miss their narrow tide windows. The heat waves shimmered off the oily water, making the delay feel twice as long as it actually was. The ships were forced to drop anchor in the outer harbor, burning fuel and racking up thousands of dollars in anchorage fees. Derek, sitting in his air-conditioned office, could not understand why the cranes were not moving. He kept calling support technicians in Boston, who told him the software was running perfectly. They did not understand that software does not fix hydraulic leaks, and they had never seen a container crane in person. By day 4, the Longshoremen Union filed a formal grievance. The shift schedules generated by Derek's software ignored 20 years of informal agreements I had negotiated with the union leaders. These agreements were not in any corporate manual. They were built on trust, handshakes, and respect. I knew which crews worked best together, who could handle the heavy container loads, and how to schedule shifts fairly to avoid burnout. The union leaders met in their grease-stained break room, the air thick with frustration and the smell of cheap coffee. They decided that without my steady hand, they would stick strictly to the contract. The union president, a veteran of 30 years on the docks, told Derek that respect is earned in the mud and rain, not on a computer screen. The software treated the men like numbers on a spreadsheet, assigning them to back-to-back shifts without regard for safety or union rules. The union responded by slowing down operations, refusing to work overtime, and sticking strictly to the letter of their contract. The productivity of the docks plummeted by 40% in a single week. The atmosphere on the docks turned toxic, and the workers openly mocked the new system. By day 11, 35 massive container ships were sitting at anchor in the outer harbor, waiting for berths that were empty but blocked by scheduling errors. Shipping dispatchers who called the operations center were met with an automated phone tree designed for customer service, not maritime operations. Frustrated, they began calling my personal cell phone. I told them I was at Harbor Point now and could not help them with Gulf Coast, but I could offer them immediate berths at my new terminal if they wanted to redirect their vessels. They did not hesitate. They were tired of dealing with automated messages and automated systems that did not work. They wanted to talk to a human who could actually solve their problems, not a digital assistant that kept repeating pre-programmed responses. By week 3, 52 ships were stranded at anchor. The backlog was so severe that local news stations began running aerial footage of the harbor, comparing the line of idle ships to a giant maritime traffic jam. The image of dozens of massive cargo ships sitting idle in the blue waters of the Gulf was a public relations disaster. Derek held an emergency meeting and blamed the staff for failing to adapt to the new digital workflow. He posted a message on his professional network, boasting about the digital transformation and using the word scalable 5 times in a short paragraph. A retired harbor pilot commented on the post, writing that the port had fired the only man who knew how to run the terminal and replaced him with a glorified pizza delivery application. The comment went viral in the industry, and Derek was becoming a laughingstock. By week 5, 68 ships were anchored in the shipping lanes. The chief financial officer, Karen Myers, walked into Derek's office with a detailed report. "We have lost $850 million in committed cargo in less than 6 weeks, she told him. "The dispatchers are refusing to send their ships here because they cannot get through to our team. They are sending everything to Jim Vance at Harbor Point." Derek arrogantly replied that the losses were just a statistical anomaly that would self-correct in the next sprint, and they would simply find new dispatchers. Karen stared at him in disbelief, noting his complete detachment from reality. "Derek, these are not lines on a graph," she said. "These are real shipping companies who are taking their steel containers and their money to Harbor Point. You cannot pay salaries with a PowerPoint slide." She turned around and walked straight to the office of the board chairman, Howard Albright. The family connection was no longer enough to protect Derek from the reality of the numbers. The board was beginning to realize that their digital transformation was costing them their entire business, and the pressure was mounting from every direction. They needed a swift resolution to the crisis. By week 7, 82 ships were anchored in the shipping lanes, creating a safety hazard that prompted the Coast Guard to issue a formal navigation warning. Commercial fishing boats were blocked from their normal routes, and the Houston Pilots Association filed a complaint with the Federal Maritime Administration. The daily losses across the petrochemical corridor reached $350 million, as refineries could not get crude oil deliveries, and chemical plants could not ship their finished products. The ripple effect was crippling the regional economy, and the federal government was starting to ask hard questions about the management of the port. During week 9, 89 ships were stuck at anchor. 4 major shipping lines, including Maersk, CMA CGM, and COSCO, officially terminated their contracts with Gulf Coast Port Authority. They did not suspend their agreements. They walked away entirely, citing breach of contract due to operational delays. The board of directors turned on Howard Albright, realizing that his decision to appoint his inexperienced nephew had cost the port its reputation and billions of dollars in revenue. Howard was forced to fire Derek on a Friday afternoon. There was no announcement, no press release. Derek packed his single cardboard box and drove away in his white sedan, his tires spinning in the gravel of the parking lot he had never walked. He had arrived with high-tech promises and left with nothing but a box of office supplies and a ruined reputation. 2 weeks later, the federal government placed Gulf Coast Port Authority under federal oversight. The Department of Transportation appointed an administrator named Richard Cole, a veteran with 38 years of experience, to take operational control. Upon reviewing the scheduling records, the administrator called an all-hands meeting. He asked who had been running vessel coordination before the software was introduced. When the staff pointed to my empty chair, the administrator shook his head. So, you fired your operating system and replaced it with a warehouse application, he said. Outstanding. He immediately suspended the use of the scheduling platform and began the slow process of rebuilding the manual scheduling system, relying on the old staff to guide them. He spent hours talking to Donnie Briggs, trying to reconstruct the web of relationships that had kept the port alive. Meanwhile, Harbor Point Maritime was thriving. 24 months after I took over, our throughput had surpassed the historical peak records of Gulf Coast Port Authority. We had redirected $12 billion in annual cargo commitments and increased our market share by 62%. Donnie Briggs and several other top supervisors had left Gulf Coast to join my team at Harbor Point. We had built a team of experienced professionals who knew the docks and respected each other. We were proving every day that the human element is what makes technology work. 6 months after Derek was fired, my phone rang on a quiet afternoon. The caller ID showed Howard Albright. His voice sounded hollow and tired, stripped of the arrogance he had once projected. "Jim," he said, "I know we made a terrible mistake. Would you consider coming back as a consultant during this federal transition? We need someone who knows how the port actually works." I looked out my window at the ships moving smoothly through the channel, guided by people who trusted each other. "I appreciate the call, Howard," I said, "but I have made commitments here, and I do not break them." I hung up the phone. 7 words that ended 22 years of history. Derek Albright eventually joined a logistics startup in Austin, which collapsed within 9 months. His professional profile still lists his 8 weeks as Vice President of Digital Operations, a permanent red flag to anyone in the maritime industry. Jim Vance, the dinosaur, was still running the docks, proving that experience cannot be replaced by an app. It was a clear Saturday in October, the temperature a comfortable 74 degrees. I sat next to Sarah in the bleachers at Pearland High School. Her latest medical scans had come back clean, and we were celebrating 4 years of cancer recovery. On the field, Toby, wearing number 46, led his team to a district championship, recording 11 tackles and 3 sacks. In the final seconds of the game, he intercepted a pass at the 15-yard line with 32 seconds remaining, sealing the victory. The crowd went wild. Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with tears of joy. 3 days later, Toby signed his letter of intent to play football at Texas A&M on a full scholarship, majoring in marine engineering. The local newspaper covered the signing, and the coach spoke at length about Toby's leadership, both on the field and in the classroom. Toby stood at the microphone and credited his family for showing him what dedication and hard work looked like. I smiled, knowing the future is in good hands. The software will always get smarter, but the shipping industry will always run on relationships, trust, and the expertise of people who know how to handle the tide. My phone buzzed with a message from Lynn in Shanghai, confirming a new vessel arrival. I put the phone in my pocket and walked down to the field to congratulate my son. The port was running smoothly and my family was finally home. The digital age has its place, but the human element is what keeps the world moving. It is the people, the relationships, and the trust that define our success.